Welcome to the Quilters Hall of Fame virtual 2020 celebration. Given that we're all sequestered in one way or another because of COVID, we're going to bring you an introduction to the 1876 Centennial Quilt Project via this telecast, videocast, I guess we'd say. My name is Karen Alexander. I'm a former president of the Quilters Hall of Fame, and I live on Lopez Island, Washington. The two other ladies with me that are the leaders, co-leaders of this project are Ann Dawson, she's waving at you, of Lopez Island also, and Barbara Menasian of Manchester, Connecticut. So welcome to our introduction. So Ann, you want to kick it off, or Barbara?
Yeah, Barbara, why don't you start by telling us something about what's on the screen there?
So this was a quilt that I had found in Manchester, Connecticut back in 1997. We had gone to an estate sale or tag sale or whatever your region calls it, and it was for sale. And at the time I was just looking to find something for our spare bedroom. We had a house from the 1930s, and I thought at the time, isn't that perfect? It would go perfect in my 1930s house. Not realizing that it was dated. It must have been on a smaller bed because I didn't really see the detail of it. Brought it home, kind of packed it away, thinking that I needed to get the room ready, and then started a family and kind of put that away. So probably in 2010, maybe, I had taken it out and started to investigate it and saw the dates on it, saw that there was initials on it. And at that point, I wanted to start working on doing some research, seeing if I could find something on that quilt. And that was the point that I started to take out books from the library, looking at, the quilts that were available, and I was starting to get the feel that this was something unique, because at the time I had done nothing with quilts. I wasn't quilting, so I didn't really realize the significance of the quilt or how unique it was, which unfortunately also meant that I didn't ask the owner of the quilt anything about it. So that was back in 1997 is when I bought it, probably I'm just guesstimating about 2010, I brought it back out to look at it. I had brought it to a regional quilt show for an appraisal, and at that point a lot of various quilters had seen it, and that's kind of when I got the feel that it was something unique, because I became known as the woman with the quilt. So I knew that there was something more to it. So again, I started looking around. Then in 2015 I had joined the Facebook group Quilts Vintage and Antiques, and at that point I had posted a picture that Karen found, and had gotten a lot of reaction, but Karen was the one that had contacted me through I think Facebook Instant Messenger to inquire more about the quilt. So, and that was in May of 2015.
Okay, my reaction to this quilt, I as a quilt historian, I belong to a number of Facebook quilt history discussion groups, and if you're the least bit interested in such quilts, I encourage you to join the one that Barb posted this on, which was Quilts Vintage and Antique. So I saw this quilt, I captured the photo. I don't make quilts very often, but this was so intriguing to me because there were so many different patterns, but also it was the setting, the medallion setting, and it just blew me away. And there are many quilts. I have a file. I keep a picture file of quilts that I dream of making. But I knew that if I was ever going to make a complex quilt, this had to be it. Now, the challenge was I wasn't about to draft this pattern. So who could draft this pattern? Well, my good friend Ann Dawson, who lives here on Lopez Island and has a quilt shop, I had heard used to do a lot of drafting back in her youth, and still does a certain amount because she teaches quilting. So I thought, okay, now how am I going to convince Ann to do this? Because this is very complex and she has a business to run. So we have a little group. You could call it a quilt bee. We call it the Ladies of Tuesday Night. So I thought, I'm going to contact them and get them excited about the possibility of this project. And then of course, Ann's a part of that group too, so she'll see that email and we'll see if she'll bite. But I knew there would be one person in this group that was most likely to jump on it immediately. That is Barbara Gantz, Barbara G. And she would bring the necessary pressure to Anne that I couldn't bring. So here's some little email excerpts once the group saw the photo of the quilt, and Anne chimed in. It's a fabulous quilt. I'm taking time to ponder all of the class suggestions before I respond. So then the next step, once Anne thought about it for a couple of weeks, she contacted me and said, okay, but we have to get permission from the owner of this quilt first. So I tracked down, because I knew who had posted the picture, so I tracked her down through Facebook, through Messenger, contacted her and asked her if she would be willing to allow us to pattern her quilt and have Anne teach a class. So she said she had to think about it for a while too. So she did, and about 2 weeks later, with emails going back and forth, she said, okay, I always did want to maybe do this, but I don't know how to do it. So yeah, let's just go ahead with it. So then I brought Anne and Barbara together. So then they got together through email, and Anne, take it from there.
Barbara and I discussed the project, what our immediate goals were about it, and came to a virtual handshake over the internet about, yes, she would allow us to do this, and I could do the patterning for that. And Barbara shared many detailed photographs over the internet from Connecticut of the quilt so that I could proceed with the drafting of the pattern. And so we began essentially in May. Well, the conversation started in May. July, I really started the work of patterning the quilt. And it wasn't until September that we actually had class together. And here we are, our first shopping foray, because you know that we have to have fabric to make this fabulous quilt. So we shopped everywhere and anywhere to collect the fabrics we might need for our individual quilts. The class started with me thinking there might be 6 or 7 people on the outside who might be interested. You know, that was a lot of people, I thought. All sort of on our island, with Barbara joining in from afar, that we would get through this together. Within a week or two, 18 people had signed up to do this, and we were off and running. So it really was exciting for a large group of people to shepherd through the whole process for me. We shopped, we collected our supplies, and we began. Here's some shots of us at class. In my little studio space, those of us who could would meet, and the rest would do this all virtually and through the mail. Each session of class that we had was a group of blocks that were related to each other in some way by their construction technique and their placement in the quilt. And we would always have our show and tell, talk about our blocks, learn the new information, and move on. Every 2 weeks we did this. And then so about 9 months later, we met up in May of 2016. Barbara Menasian and the quilt, who we lovingly call EMC for the initials on it, came to Lopez Island for the first time, and we were able to meet Barbara and the quilt. Barbara, what were your reactions to this invite to come to Lopez?
Well, I think we alluded to it before that that was part of why I, other than your pure charm, was that you were located on Lopez Island, which was, you know, just a picturesque island off the Pacific Northwest. And it was just a dream that, you know, maybe this quilt could kind of bring me in different places that I would never get to on my own. So I think it was in a Christmas card that I got from your group the first year planning this May trip, and everyone was writing stuff in the card about, you know, that I have to come in May. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. But thinking it would never happen. And then it did come to be, and it was, you know, it was nerve wracking because I hadn't met anybody. We weren't doing any virtual meetings. It was all through email. And quite frankly, how do you tell your family and your kids that you're going across the country to meet people that you met on the internet and have never met them in person? It, goes against everything you would tell your kids is the right thing to do. So it was a strange feeling. But when I got there, it was like I had known everyone for years. Everyone was so welcoming. The event just could have been, everything that being a quilter is all about. And I was not a quilter when I started this. I was a craft sewer, but at the time that I began the project, I took a quilting 101 class. So I was concurrently learning to quilt at the same time as getting taught by your instructions. So it was, it was pretty exciting, that first visit out there.
Well, and we immediately all fell in love with Barbara, so it worked out all around. So we met that first day in May of 2016 in Karen's quilt cabin, where she keeps her extensive quilt collection, and had the big unveiling of EMC, who's hiding underneath that sheet there. And then voila, we all had the opportunity to spend some hours studying the quilt and just talking about it and discovering more things about it in person that were just wonderful. It was a very exciting and kind of a heady time for all of us. It was wonderful. Lots of photographs were taken that day. And it also gave me the opportunity to see the quilt for the first time in person and do some more studying of the pattern. And in these photos now, you can see that I am tracing, in this photo, one of the more unique blocks in the quilt that I didn't quite have a handle on just from a photograph. So I put a plastic overlayment and did some tracing to be able to keep a real-time drawing of it to do the work on after Barbara left with the quilt after the weekend. Some pictures of my sketches there. I did most of the drafting for this pattern with graph paper, pencil, and a compass, just as the original quilt maker would have done. And it took hours to draft blocks and figure out what the grid system is they were drafted on. And I started with the blocks that were the easiest for my benefit.
And you had an individual photo of each block to start with.
Correct. I had an individual photo of the block. And then I could actually scaled up the photo to be about the measurement size that Barbara sent me. And I could figure out what grid the patchwork block was drafted on. And then I could go from there, working from the easier pieces to the harder blocks, and thus grouping them for presentation for class along the lines of technique, as well as we worked on the blocks to create this quilt. Also on that retreat weekend, we had class together, and we can see everyone gathered in one of our community halls with blocks behind them. So at this point, everybody has kind of a group of blocks behind them. And we're starting on the circular blocks in the quilt, harder blocks to make, no doubt. And then about a year later, we get Barbara back with EMC to have a little quilt show of all of our tops that were finished in a local venue on Lopez. It was a great, great event. The community was very excited to see our quilts. We live in a very small place, and the fact that 250 people showed up to see our quilts was really exciting for us, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, yes, we were thrilled. That many showed up.
And we had lots of positive feedback.
And the quilts, all the tops weren't done yet.
Not all of them, but pretty much everybody put up what they'd done so that we could see what they'd made and be encouraged to continue the process of finishing our tops. Here's a photo of all of us, the original 18 people, in front of the antique quilt. This is the one and only time all 18 of us had been in the same place at the same time. And it still is the only time we've been in the same place at the same time.
All 18.
So all 18 of us. A really wonderful group from Connecticut and the Seattle area and Lopez and San Juan Island where we live, and now in Arizona as well. So all over the place. And also, Karen, why don't you tell us what special thing you started the ball rolling on that you announced at this event that we had?
Yeah, well, once I knew this project was a go, I thought, okay, when we get these things done, we've got to exhibit them. Well, of course, where do you want to exhibit? You want to go for the big time so lots of people get to see it. So I contacted Houston's exhibit manager. The Houston Quilt event, Quilts Inc., was founded by one of the honorees of the Quilters Hall of Fame, Terry Bressenhan. So I contacted their offices and asked, told them, sent them a long email, told them all about the project and what we were hoping to accomplish. And so they sent me back the forms, the application forms, and we started to fill out that and let everybody know that there would be a deadline date by which all the quilts had to be done because they needed a photograph of the finished quilt. So we started the wheels rolling certainly by this date when we had this meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was spring of 16.
No, May of 17, we got it started.
17. So yeah. So I just managed that background stuff of getting that done for the group.
And we had to have our application in by the fall to see if we would be accepted to have a special exhibit.
Finally heard that spring of 18, didn't we? It's like February or March, we finally got the final word.
February of 2018, we found out that we were all going. It was really exciting.
Yeah, because you don't always get all the quilts accepted. They have their own, floor space to evaluate, so forth and so on. But we wanted all the quilts in the exhibit, and all of them got accepted. So we were able to actually have more than 18 because a couple people made more than one.
Yes, they did. We had 2 members make, one member ultimately made 4 of these, and another member made 3. And all of these quilts were eventually exhibited through the International Quilt Festival venues. So to sort of recap the initial project, we started in September of 2015. We had our last official meeting in May of 2017. There were 18 of us all together. We met every other week for that year and a half for 36 sessions, including a couple of get-togethers on Lopez that were great, and a little pre-Houston organizational meeting. And then we went to Houston, and then we're invited to Chicago. I thought we would now take a look at a few of the quilts in particular, although remember that all of the quilts from the project that are exhibited on the Quilters Hall of Fame virtual gallery for their celebration. So you can have another look at the quilts in the gallery setting as well. And you should get a link for that is on their website. So the quilts, just showing you a few here. Carol Strum, 1876 Friendships is her quilt. 2 things about Carol. She was a relatively new quilt maker, hadn't really done patchwork before. And so she was able to make this quilt beautifully without a lot of experience. And she made it out of Japanese styled woven taupes, very different palette than anyone else used. Very quiet colors with lots of interesting textures to them in the material she used. And her quilt is spectacular. And it's just a very different look than most of the other 1876 quilts. She did a stellar job. Avenel, over here on the right-hand side, my right, did a couple of unusual things with her quilt called Indigo to Cheddar. She opted not to do the initial and date blocks, which would be in this position. And so she created 4 other circular compass blocks of her own and set them in there. And unfortunately, you can't really see it in this photo, but she used a plaid, little check plaid behind all those blocks, which is spectacular, and played a big part in something personal for me that we'll talk about in a little bit. Her colors are just wonderful. A beautiful quilt from Avenel. Joanne Bryant chose to use purples and teals and gold in her quilt, which is use all kinds of different print styles in her quilt. She has batiks, she has Paula Nettelstein type fabrics, she has Aboriginal styled fabrics in there, as well as textural things going on that she did a lot of fussy cutting that made just a fabulous quilt, all held together with this gold setting fabric that just makes the whole thing sing. The title of Joanne's really speaks to our entire process, having all of these different people work on this quilt, all kinds of different fabrics. You know, most people used a couple hundred different fabrics in their quilts. Title for Joanne's is Unity in Diversity. And I think it just speaks really well to the 1876 Centennial Quilt Project. A few more quilts here. We have Barbara Gaunt's. This is one of 4 that she made. It's all made out of Kaif fabrics, and it's called Kaif meets Cirque du Soleil. It's a fabulous, fabulous quilt. Tori Benz Hillstrom, hers is called She Who Must Be Named. It's made entirely out of batiks. And Tori was also a relatively new piece worker, patch worker, and she finished her quilt long distance from Arizona. So we had 2 long distance quilters, Barbara and Tori. 2 here at the bottom are from Sheila Bishop. These are 2 of the 3 that she did. And this one's all in solids, 3 colors of solids, and it still works. It's beautiful. And it's called 221B. In reference to Sherlock Holmes, because she loves Sherlock Holmes, and 221B being the address of his lodgings. And also, it took her 221 hours to hand quilt this quilt. She kept track the whole time. This one of Sheila's is called Pinky. Again, it's a tight color story, pinks and greens, lots of fussy cutting in this one. And Sheila as well used different blocks in the date and initial blocks of her own design. The quilts on this slide are by Lori Latta and Heather Arps, and they both chose to do something different with the pattern, so to speak, in that neither of them needed to make a giant quilt. Lori has a limited space for displaying quilts, so she chose to make 2, one out of traditional fabrics that fits in a beautiful area she has in her home for displaying quilts. And the second one, she chose to use 1930s fabrics and set it in a very different way. And these are all of the blocks that we refer to as the A blocks. They're on the outside border of the quilt. Straight set with some sashing out of 1930s fabrics that she uses on her bunk beds when her grandkids come to stay. Heather is another quilter from Connecticut, so there's a connection there with Barbara, and her quilt is called Yankee Traveler. Heather, these colors are so Heather. This is what she wears all the time. You would instantly recognize this as her quilt if you knew her. And she also created some of her own blocks to put in here to make it more her own, and chose this fabulous printed stripe border that holds the whole piece together. And it is also a smaller quilt as well. Now, Barbara, I want you to talk about your quilt a little bit. This is Barbara Menasian's 1876 quilt.
So a couple of things. I chose to do the replica version of it. And part of that was because I knew that my existing quilt that I had, the antique one, was not anything that I could ever display, not anything I could ever use. And I really, because I loved it so much, wanted a version of it that I could eventually put on a bed or hang on a wall or something like that. So it was important for me to do, the replica version of it. And in addition, I hadn't noticed it in the beginning, nor did I actually have a family at the time. But through the years, I had 2 children, and both of them, I have a son named Edward. His initial is an E, and then my daughter is Cora, and then with our last name, Menasian. So that's why I kept those initials, not just to keep it the same as the original quilt, but so it meant something to my family, and then I just rearranged them in the age order of my children. But retrospectively, that was pretty ironic that it matched my family in a different way like that. So I do like
I
to
think
joke that I'm reincarnated, that it was my quilt that I made originally. So, maybe
maybe
take
so.
full
Why
credit.
not? Since we don't know who made this quilt, might as well be that story. I love it. I love it.
That's purely a joke, but so I did do that so I could actually use that quilt eventually. Now, of course, I have it, and I can't imagine putting it on my bed, but I think eventually it will end up on bed somewhere. So that's why I did that. And my original intention of this, because I was so new at quilting, was I was just going to follow the patterns as they went and go as far as I could. And I started the project being totally okay with, at some point I was going to have to stop and make a quilt with whatever I had gotten done. And there was like one or two blocks that I really struggled with, but as I was getting through the project and learning the skills as things went through, I just plowed through the ones that I had most difficulty with. And in the end, I was able to finish the whole quilt. So I was, you can point to the ones with the circles.
The dreaded A15.
Dreaded A15. It was exciting to me when we finally did get it done, that I was able to finish it all and accomplish all of the blocks and putting it all together.
We all need to be proud of our work, because it was quite the process. We like to use the word journey to go through and make this. And can you imagine doing this quilt as the original quilt maker and coming up with all of these ideas and then figuring out how to put it all together? So I'm really glad we had a guide in EMC, because I certainly never would have ever dreamt of this layout. Beautiful.
That was one of the comments. Every time I would make something, I would just shake my head. There's a few obviously were probably published patterns anyways, but some of these I'm like, how would she have possibly come up with knowing how to do this, or coming up with the idea to do it in the first place? So I was in awe with you, Anne, actually being able to make the patterns, but at least you had a guide or a roadmap.
Yeah, I did.
EMC didn't. So that was amazing to me.
And then here we have Karen's. And Karen's has a great story too. So Karen, why don't you tell us about yours?
More stories keep coming up as the three of us talk here today. One of the things, after I saw it, we decided we were going to do it, then I started doing research, and I came up with photographs online of 2,000-year-old tiled floors from the Roman era in that area of the world. And even after we started this project, a new one had been discovered and uncovered. So I have in my files on my computer photographs of these different Roman tiled floors, and some of them are very similar to this idea, with a circular center and then different kinds of blocks going around the edges, but nothing's exactly like this. But that's what I love, that this concept, this idea is really at least 2,000 years old, which I love being a historian. Making this quilt was enormously challenging to me because I don't make quilts very often. I think the last one I had made had been about 7 years earlier for my granddaughter, small quilt. Couple of very small wall quilts that I'd been asked to make for various history projects. It took a lot to keep me going. One of the things we were discussing earlier today was that by the time you get through this series, you probably will have learned all the different types of pattern concepts of putting things together and how you do it, the process of how you do it. I just had not worked with like setting in corners, or there's just so many things I had not worked with. And by the time I got through this quilt, I had tried every kind of piecing, I swear, that there is. I turned some of mine into applique. I have more appliques in mine than the original called for, but I love applique. I do more applique than I do piecing. And I wound up naming mine Perseverance. And I could not have finished this without the encouragement of this whole gang, this group, our our initial group of 18, because they kept encouraging me. And at one point I thought, once we knew we were accepted in Houston, I still was so far behind. And I told the group, okay, it's okay with me. I don't have to be in Houston. Just the fact that I've gotten this far and that where the exhibit's going to hang, I'll go anyway, but I'm not going to have it done in time. Several in the group said, no, no, no. And one young lady in particular, I think she's the youngest in the group, said, no, Karen, yours is going to hang too. So mine wound up being a friendship quilt because at least 20 of my blocks are made by other members of the group, which makes the quilt even more special to me because I love friendship quilts. And I printed a schemata on fabric and added it to the back of this quilt where it puts the initials in each block as to who made it. And then I have a list down the side of the full name of that person. So when you turn it over, you can go flip back and forth and see who actually made that block. A couple of blocks in particular that I really enjoyed, the one that you're looking at on the far right-hand side, the second one from the bottom on the right, that's pink and brown. That one on the original quilt has 1876 Centennial fabric in it. So what I did is I photographed the original and then I printed that center square onto fabric. I don't know if you can see this, but this is another example of it. So I actually printed my photo of the original fabric onto fabric I put through my printer, and then I added it in that block so that I feel like I have a little connection there to the original quilt through that fabric. And frankly, I think I did it on the other one too. There are two of them. Yeah, it's on the same right-hand side between the two yellows. The other one, that center is again printed, photograph of the original, printed onto fabric I put through my printer. It's also fun to do fussy cutting, and I had one. It's in the circle. It's the red star one in the circle, and down about 5 o'clock. Yes, that one. This is the fabric I used. This is the fabric, and I put the fabric through my printer, and I printed paper. And then I used the pattern and I cut out a triangular pattern out of this portion of this stripe. And by doing it on paper first and getting all my little points, I could make all those points go like a whirligig. They go around, around, around. So that was fun. So that's something I did. Then
What about your corners, Karen?
Oh yeah, my corners. My corners. When I went to do the corners, I cut out the circles to put in the circular blocks starting up in the left-hand corner of that row of E-blocks of column. I cut that one circle, green and brown circle, just the first block down on the left side of the screen, way over on the left side of the screen. There, that block. I cut, without thinking, I cut that background circle too large because I didn't want to lose my tips. Then when I got the circles in and went to put in these red and white things, those were supposed to be trapezoids and it wouldn't fit. It was the trapezoid was going to come, there wasn't going to be any green between those two. So I said, what the heck, I'll just turn these trapezoids into circles. And so that's what I did. So you just, you think on your feet as you go and you solve your problems as you go. There's no wrong way to do anything. Maybe some better ways sometimes, but there's no wrong way.
Excellent comment about quilt making.
Now, do not put yourself through the ringer about thinking you've done something wrong. No, you've just improvised on it and it solves your problem and you move forward.
Exactly.
So, perseverance.
Nice, Karen. We're so glad that you finished it.
I was too. I was so thrilled with the help of the group. That was just really, it was very special to me.
Well, nobody was going to get left behind. For sure. So this one is mine. This is my second 1876 quilt. My first one kind of looks exactly like Barbara Menasian's and Karen's. It's a replica quilt that I did as my teaching pattern quilt. I thought it was important to try and really think or imagine what EMC was thinking about while I was quilting and make something that looked as much like it as possible. As well, I don't own that quilt, so I needed a version of my own to be able to show people what the quilt looks like, right? And so after I'd finished that, I wanted to do anything but reproduction fabric. So I chose to use a color palette I really like, which are sort of sea glass colors, aquas, greens, blues, and using what I would call modern fabric, in which I also did a lot of fussy cutting. And it was a lot of fun. It was great to collect all that fabric for this quilt, and I'm quite happy with it. It's also behind me on the wall here. Earlier, I spoke about Avenel's Indigo to Cheddar piece that had a plaid sashing between the circular blocks. She gave me the courage to use one in this quilt, and you can see a bit of it in here. And I struggled a really long time trying to decide what to put in this position behind the circular blocks, trying very many different things. And then I finally kind of stumbled on this large scaled plaid, and it just made the whole quilt come together and work for me. It's what makes me smile when I look at this quilt, is that particular choice of fabric there. I'm pretty happy with that. And this one, I hope someday, like Barbara, I'll put it on my bed. We have a few more quilt stories, just a couple more quilt stories to tell you. This is Barbara Schneider's quilt, and it is made entirely of Asian themed print fabric, and it's beautifully made. She has a lot of these fabrics have metallics on them, so when you see it in person, it kind of glitters and glows. It's a lovely, lovely piece. She did lots of fun fussy cutting on it, and it's a really great piece. Its story, however, is not quite as smooth. She had finished this quilt and had sent it off to her machine quilter, who lives out of state, and was getting it, got quilted. She was really excited. It was coming back to get the binding on. And then the quilt box disappeared. It was lost through UPS, had it, and the box disappeared. It couldn't be tracked. They couldn't find it anywhere. UPS said it was lost and had actually mailed her a check for a minimum amount of compensation, but it was heartbreaking. We were thinking,
all devastated.
We were heartbroken. We were devastated. We were into Houston. She wanted, it's too much work to start over, but how could we start over? Could we all make blocks and make this quilt together for her? Barbara Schneider, who owns the quilt, was pretty, upset and despondent as well. Well, our group, being the group we are, members stepped up and started calling UPS
and
emailing UPS, and finally got to the top of the food chain at UPS and spoke to a gentleman who had was a head of something, who had a quilt connection. So he understood what was lost in that box.
He knew what quilts meant to their makers.
And within a week, she had her quilt. So they found it. So don't give up if your quilt's lost with UPS. And always, always, always put information inside the box for addresses about if the labels come off of a box, they'll look inside.
Yeah,
there was no address inside this box.
That's what happened. The label came off, and the sender who returned the quilt to the maker forgot to put that same information inside the box. Copy your label, put it inside the box too, always, always. And the sender forgot to do that. And
so here's the center medallion of Barbara's quilt, and she named it Wandering Geisha, which is the perfect name for this wandering quilt who found its way home again. I just love that story because it has a really happy ending.
Oh, yes. Oh, we were also thrilled.
And Karen, you're going to talk about this one.
Well, I'll just share my total response, but Anne, I think you know a lot more details than I do. But the first time I started seeing Cheryl's blocks, I was just like, whoa. And you look at this blue, it just absolutely blings. And it's Pennsylvania German, based on Pennsylvania German. That's my roots. Anyway, just love the color scheme of this quilt. And it's such an example of, though we all use the same patterns, how totally choice of color can change what a quilt looks like. And this is a great example. And instead of putting initials in, she put the birds in, which is also Pennsylvania Dutch. She found those in various, I think, books. So those are Pennsylvania Dutch designs. So that was my reaction. This quilt just Every time I see it, my heart starts beating faster, I think.
It's a beautiful
She-
quilt.
And she tried, Anne, you can tell us more about how she went about coming up with that final red there behind the baskets. There you go, yeah.
Cheryl initially had chosen this fabric, this pink, to go behind the baskets. Had everything sewn together. She's ready to put her circular blocks onto that. But she wasn't quite sure she liked it. So she put a different color pink behind. This is more of a salmon-y kind of color. And she wasn't quite sure she liked it. So she did it one more time, took things apart, put it back together.
Brave woman.
And ended up with this configuration where she has this red print behind the baskets and the hot pink in this area here. And it was the right choice. It just sets off that circular center beautifully. So redoing things was part of what many people did. Even after they'd done a lot of difficult sewing, they would go back and rework things until it worked for them. Because that's the ultimate test. Does it work? Does it look good to the person who's making it? And Cheryl's quilt is called Birdie.
Cheryl works, she's a veterinarian at a zoo, isn't she?
Yes, she's a zookeeper. And so we'll just talk a little bit about Houston. We were accepted. We all were accepted. And some of us traveled to Houston together. And here we are at the convention center, our little preview night picture. You can tell we're really excited about being there. Here's our exhibit in the hall. And I'll tell you, when I saw it, it was pretty amazing to see them all hung together. It's beautiful. I really hope that we get to get back on the show circuit next summer. This summer, everything was canceled. And so we really hope that we'll be able to show them out in the public again, because it's really a wonderful experience. And here we are hobnobbing with attendees. Everyone loved to talk to the viewers and share stories with them about our project. Excuse me.
Yeah, down there in the left-hand corner, we're talking to a school group, and they each had their little checklist. They were supposed to, the teacher had given them a piece of paper to write on, and they were to take little notes as they walked through the whole, Houston Center. And they were so much fun to talk with, and the questions and the curiosity they had about it, to see all the variations there. That was really fun.
Mesmerized.
One comment that I think we all experienced there was people would kind of walk by and they'd go, oh, they're all the same. And then they would say, oh, they're all the same. And they would go in and they really would look at them and were amazed how the same pattern, the same design could look so different from quilt to quilt to quilt. And that was really fun to watch everyone's surprise at that. While we were in Houston, we found out that we were invited to travel with Quilts Inc. to Chicago, to their spring Chicago show in 2019. And here's our display in Chicago. And I like this photo because it shows the antique up front here, and then bookmarked by Barbara M's quilt. And you can really see how the two quilts look so much alike. And people were really thrilled and amazed to see the antique in person. We're just really grateful that it was able to travel there. So thank you for letting it out of your house, Barbara, for that show. The other wonderful thing that happened in Chicago was our dear friend, Barbara Gauntz, remember, maker of 4 of these, had her quilt, Cafe and Friends Meet Cirque du Soleil, selected to be the cover girl quilt for the program. And here's the program. Here's Barbara with the commemorative t-shirt in front of her quilt and the logo. They always make a pin and have a logo for the show. And they pulled this block from Barbara's quilt to be the logo. And there it is from the original quilt. This is Barbara's interpretation. And then this is what they did with the logo. And it was really a highlight for all of us to have this, and an incredible honor for Barbara. It was really a lovely, lovely thing. And she made it there, which was, she had some health issues, and it really was amazing that she was able to attend. It was great.
Yeah, and I want to share one more thing about her, because she's the one, when I first decided to tell our ladies of Tuesday night about this quilt. She's the one that I knew that would get on Ann Dawson's tail and make her pattern this quilt. Because if Barbara wants to do something, she has that kind of personality that she gets things done, and she just immediately jumped on it. And all her health problems, she made it down to Houston by train and car because she can't fly. She passed in December 2019, but she got to see her quilts hanging in Houston and Chicago. And if you Google her name, Barbara Gantz, an 1876 quilt, you'll probably come up with my blog post. My blog's called Quilt History Reports. And you'll come up with a long post about her and this project and the celebration we had at her memorial service. And so I just encourage you to Google her name with the number 1876 quilt in the Google search.
You could not say no to that woman, no matter how much you wanted to. So we made it through these shows. We're trying to think about, oh my gosh, why did we do this? Who would want to do this? Why would anybody want to do this?
All of that.
And so we did some brainstorming, and we came up with some big takeaways. I think, Barbara, you mentioned this a lot, the education.
Right. It was just amazing to me that starting off in the beginning, just everything kind of built on each other. You built on skills that you were learning from the last time. Your patterns were just clearly outlined. The instructions were very clear. The patterns were very clear, easy to use. So it was just amazing to me that you could start with one set of blocks and then just build the different techniques and uses for them. And by the end of the quilt, I really, not that I'm going to make every quilt I see, but I really don't feel like there's a quilt I couldn't attempt because of all of the different skill building that's involved in this.
Amen.
And you feel really confident by the time you're done that you can, may not be the quickest quilt you're going to make, but, little by little, you can get all of your different pieces done, and it just really felt good, and you feel confident in the end being a quilter doing that. So I thank you, Ann, and I thank Karen too.
Well, and see, there's perseverance. See, that's the name of my quilt, perseverance. It's well worth it. Don't worry if it takes you 3 or 4 years to make this thing. You will learn so much.
It's a huge confidence builder. It's a huge opportunity to hone your patchwork and piecing skills, no matter where you are in your journey of quilt making, from relatively new at it to somebody who's been doing it for 20 years. Every single person who was in this project, I think their biggest thing was how much they learned, even though they already knew it all. And that includes everyone. I would think that I'm probably the one who learned the most through this project, from that how to communicate information to people, how to use my computer in a new way. That was huge for me. So it's been great.
And we were the guinea pigs. We were our first class. We were the guinea pigs. So as we used her patterns, of course, I didn't know enough to tell her what she needed to change. But those who really had already had more experience were able to, I think there were just a couple of times they would tell her, well, yeah, we think you need to tweak this a little bit, and da-da-da-da. And so it really, like Ann said, she learned too from doing all this.
Absolutely. Some of the techniques we used in the pattern came from various members in the group that were great ideas for how to do something. So it was really a group experience. We all gained a lot of confidence, and we all feel really good that we did this. Huge accomplishment that we can look at and say, wow, this was amazing what we did and how we did that. But I think also one of the main things is this community bit, right?
Yes, yes. I couldn't have done it without community. Just who I am, maybe.
How we all were brought together by this project. And are still connected now through Zoom, which is great. And Barbara, love for you to tell us about this.
I was putting together a presentation and I was asking some of the people from the group. Well, I asked everybody, but what sort of takeaways did they have for the project? And Barbara had written this back, Barbara Gauntz had written this back, and I just thought that it really kind of captured the essence of the connection between the past as well as the current people that are involved. And I'll just read you what she wrote. What has surprised me is that is what has happened to us as a group while creating our individual interpretations of this quilt. And each unique quilt has been successful. That is a hallmark of a remarkable pattern. Second, an unexpected benefit is that we have developed into an interesting support system for each other. Whether by close by or needing to reach across the country, we are still bound together by this invisible bond. That speaks volumes about the unknown woman who created this masterpiece 150 years ago, which is just exciting to me because, in all of this, I never wanted the original creator to get kind of brushed under the carpet by all of our new stuff. And I don't think it has. I think it really has kind of elevated her into another level of quilt making. So that was kind of exciting to me to read that. And it just kind of really was like a warm sentiment to our group as well as everybody who has come before us.
And hopefully with showing of your quilt more and more and more, somebody will step up and say, hey, I know that quilt.
Oh, that quilt?
Because we would love to know who.
Yeah, we're still searching for the original. I mean, the person who made it.
We are.
Yeah.
So, this is my favorite photo ever. This is us, the end of our project, gleefully celebrating our accomplishment. How happy we are that we all did this. Each person here would encourage you, somebody watching here might be interested in making their own. It's totally doable and available to do. So far, out in the world, we have 76ers, as we call ourselves, in 21 states across the country, and some international folks in Australia, France, and Switzerland, all who have or are working on their 1876 project. And how do you do this? It's a block of the month or blocks of the month pattern project that is a subscription that you sign up for, and every month I send you in the mail a packet of patterns and templates and instructions for you to create your own quilt. Does not include fabric because you want to choose your own fabric for this. You don't want my choices because this is your quilt, not mine. And to find out more about it, you're just going to contact me at www.1876quilt.com. That's one way you can reach me. And to create your own thing. And why would you want to do this? To build your chops in the quilt making world. You're really going to learn a lot. And learning all those different techniques will make you a better quilt maker. It's also going to connect you to all of us who've gone before and done it. It's going to connect you to EMC. It can connect you to a group of your friends. You can all do this together. I really would encourage you to think about it and ask me some more questions. And so we've got Karen and me and Barbara in front of Barbara's Beauty EMC. And hopefully you guys, we're going to get to be in person again soon, maybe next summer while we're touring. That would be great. Anybody have something you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, I wanted to add just briefly, as I told you, I'm really a quilt historian. And so I have kept every email that I have received from anybody in the project. And I have literally put together 4 binders, some bigger than others. This is not the biggest. I have 4 binders where I have documented the process of this whole project. And one of the really fun parts of that, and I encourage anybody who likes to do that kind of stuff, one of the things I did, I don't know if you can see this, this is an experiment. This is a sales receipt. Sales receipt for fabric. And then I put a little snippet of the fabric. That's the detail that I keep in my research when I do research. And so I've got 4 binders, I've got all the different fabrics. I even cut off the that outer strip that has the name of the producer of the fabric. You know, just detail. If you like to do research, have fun documenting your project as you go.
And we counted on Karen to do that for us, right, Barbara?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I started that a little bit, and then I kind of abandoned it as I was making more blocks.
And I hope that my research on this project will all go to the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska eventually. Because as a member of the American Quilt Study Group, Barbara Brackman and Mary Kay Waldvogel, who are both honorees of the Hall of Fame, have worked with the university museum, university, and the university is making storage space for quilt historian archives. And so all of my quilt history archives will eventually go there to University of Nebraska, and that will include my binder projects. And the quilt may or may not, depends on my kids.
Oh, maybe one of the many that were being made, maybe we'll end up there, we hope. That would be a great place to have
I think they need the quilt to go with the research binders, you know. We'll see.
There you go. All right. Well, until next time, girls, this has been great. And here's my contact information if anybody needs to get a hold of me about questions about the project, information about how you can participate or not. And there we go. It was great to chat with you guys today.
Oh, it was so much fun to be able to get back together through Zoom.
Yep.
This is
All right.
a lot of memories. Yep. Have a wonderful year.
Well, let's get through the summer.
Yes. Thanks
All right.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.